On the night of January 23rd, 1934, Padre Pio awoke trembling, his face covered with tears. He had just witnessed something that would haunt him until his last days, the soul of a European king being judged before the divine throne. But what he saw in that heavenly tribunal defied all expectations. It wasn't the mercy he might have anticipated. It wasn't swift condemnation either. It revealed something far deeper, the true foundation of our eternal destiny. Even with decades of mystical experiences, Padre Pio was profoundly shaken, because what he witnessed exposes three truths about divine judgment that most people are completely unaware of, truths that can radically transform your spiritual life right now. Before we continue, you need to understand who Padre Pio was and why his revelations carry authentic spiritual weight. The Catholic Church rigorously documented his supernatural gifts by location, witnessed by dozens of people, soul reading that exposed unconfessed sins, mystical visions that confirmed themselves with startling precision. During his intense nights of prayer, this humble saint from southern Italy entered into contemplative states so profound that the veil between the material and spiritual world became transparent before his stigmatized eyes. We are not talking about legends. We are talking about phenomena investigated, documented, and validated by the Church over decades. And it was on one of these nights that Padre Pio witnessed something profoundly shaking. He saw, with his own mystical eyes, the soul of a recently deceased European king brought before the throne of divine judgment. What he witnessed defied all preconceptions. It wasn't a scene of immediate mercy or swift condemnation. It was something far more complex, far more revealing about the nature of divine judgment and what truly matters when our soul stands before God. Let us understand who this king was. Historical records and testimonies from Padre Pio's confidants reveal he was a European monarch from the early 20th century, a man who ruled with absolute power, commanded armies, and influenced the destinies of millions. He had access to every earthly luxury, enjoyed universal respect and fear. But before the divine throne, as Padre Pio witnessed, none of it mattered. Absolutely nothing. Padre Pio described the vision with details that convey the magnitude of what unfolded. The king's soul, stripped of all earthly glory and pomp, stood naked before the infinite light, and there, under the penetrating gaze of divine justice, what Padre Pio called the complete inventory of the soul began to unfold. Every thought, every word, every action, every omission, everything laid bare, nothing hidden. And here we arrive at the first profound revelation, one that will reshape your spiritual understanding. Padre Pio witnessed something that contradicts what most people believe about divine judgment. The soul is not judged primarily by what it did, but by what it became. Absorb this truth. It's not the list of sins or good deeds that determines our eternal destiny. It's the interior transformation, or its absence, that the soul experienced during its earthly journey. It's the state of your soul, shaped by thousands of seemingly insignificant daily choices, that ultimately reveals itself under the penetrating light of the Creator. The king, as Padre Pio described, had access to the sacraments, priests at his disposal, and all the spiritual opportunities most people will never possess. Yet his soul, as revealed in the vision, was marked by something devastating: the hardness of his heart. Decades of pride, of wielding power without mercy, of placing his own will above all else, had transformed his soul into something hardened, impermeable to divine grace. Padre Pio witnessed how, throughout the king's life, God's grace had knocked countless times on the door of his heart. Moments of divine inspiration, encounters with holy people, whispers of conscience, invitations to true conversion. Yet one by one, these graces were rejected, ignored, suffocated by pride and self-sufficiency. And with each refusal, as Padre Pio witnessed, the heart grew harder, more impermeable, increasingly distant from the transformation God desired. This first revelation carries urgent practical implications for your spiritual life today. It means we cannot simply accumulate external religious practices, attending Mass, praying the Rosary, using sacramentals, while our heart remains closed, hardened, and resistant to genuine transformation. Every moment of pride we harbor, every act of mercy we withhold, every time we place our will above divine will, we're shaping our soul like a sculptor shapes clay. We're determining what it will become. We're deciding choice by choice what it will present before the throne of judgment. Stop for a moment and think about your own life right now. How many times have you felt the touch of divine grace? That inner whisper inviting you to forgive someone who hurt you deeply, to let go of a destructive habit that you know is harming your soul, to grow in humility when pride was whispering justifications in your ear. How many times have you felt that invitation and simply ignored it? Each one of these choices matters more than you imagine. Each one of them is shaping your soul in this very moment, either transforming it into something malleable in God's hands, or hardening it like stone, preparing it for eternity, or making it resistant to the very salvation that God desires to offer. Now imagine the scene that Padre Pio described: the king, his soul exposed, facing the reality of decades of wasted opportunities, of rejected graces, of a heart that chose hardness instead of spiritual docility. It was not God who condemned him. It was the very state of his soul, the result of his own choices, that determined his inability to receive the divine mercy that continued to be offered even in that moment of judgment. But Padre Pio's vision revealed something even deeper, something that leads us to the second great revelation. He witnessed that even in that terrible moment of judgment, divine mercy was present, offering itself, extending itself toward that soul. But here is the terrifying paradox that Padre Pio described. A soul transformed into stone by pride and hardness of heart becomes incapable of receiving mercy. Not because God withdraws it, but because the soul, through its own choices, has molded itself in such a way that it can no longer open itself to receive it. It is as if you were standing before a crystal-clear fountain, dying of thirst, but your hands had clenched into fists so tight and for so long that you can no longer open them to receive the water that could save you. The water is there, abundant, offered freely, but your own condition, the result of your choices, makes you incapable of receiving it. Padre Pio wept when describing this vision. He wept because he understood the supreme tragedy. It is not that God is cruel or that his mercy has limits. It is that we ourselves, through our daily choices, can transform ourselves into beings incapable of receiving the very love that God longs to pour out upon us. We can become impermeable to grace, hardened against mercy, closed off from the transformation that would be our salvation. This second revelation must lead us to a profound examination of conscience in this very moment. How is your heart today? Is it becoming more docile to divine grace or more resistant to it? Are your daily choices opening your soul to transformation or closing it off more and more? Are you allowing pride, anger, lack of forgiveness, lust and greed to harden your heart, or are you cultivating humility, mercy, purity and generosity that keep your soul malleable in God's hands? Padre Pio's teachings, based on this vision and his other mystical experiences, warn us of a critical error that many commit. They think that it is enough to go to church on Sundays, pray a few prayers, perhaps confess sins occasionally, and that will be sufficient. But if the heart remains hardened, if there is no genuine transformation, if we continue cultivating the same spiritual vices, then we are building a fortress of pride around our soul that can become impenetrable, even to divine mercy. Padre Pio saw this constantly in his confessional. He had the supernatural gift of reading souls and often refused absolution to people who came to confess sins but lacked genuine contrition, lacked true desire for change, and whose hearts were hardened by the repetition of sin and lack of genuine repentance. He knew that absolution under these conditions would be useless, perhaps even harmful, because it would give the person a false sense of security while their soul continued its path of hardening. The vision of the dying king revealed to Padre Pio a truth he spent the rest of his life trying to transmit. The time of transformation is now. It is in this earthly life that we shape our soul. It is here, amid temptations, challenges and opportunities for spiritual growth, that we decide who we will become for eternity. When we leave this world, our soul will be fixed in the state we chose to create through our daily decisions. And this leads us to an urgent question that you must answer now. What are you doing today to keep your heart open to divine grace? What spiritual practices are you cultivating that truly transform your soul, rather than simply fulfilling an external religious obligation? How are you responding to the touches of grace that God sends into your life each day? But what Padre Pio saw next reveals something even deeper about the third aspect of divine judgment, an element that most people completely ignore in their spiritual life. And that can make all the difference between a prepared soul and a soul in mortal danger before God's throne. Remember what we saw about the appearance of the soul before the divine tribunal. That terrifying vision that Padre Pio witnessed, the soul stained, trembling under the weight of eternal judgment. But here is what most people do not realize, that revelation was not merely a warning. It was the first key to a complete system of spiritual protection that Padre Pio received through his mystical experiences. And this second revelation provides the practical key to protection that can completely transform your preparation for that inevitable moment. Throughout his decades of ministry, Father Pio observed a deeply disturbing pattern. Devout people who prayed daily, attended Mass, and used sacramentals, these very same people committed critical errors that undermined their spiritual protection. And through his extraordinary mystical experiences, God revealed to him exactly what those errors were and how to correct them. Text. Let me share the three most dangerous errors that Father Pio identified, errors that most sincere Catholics commit without even realizing it. The first error that the unprepared soul commits is confusing the possession of sacred objects with the state of sanctifying grace. Father Pio witnessed this repeatedly in the confessional. People arrived carrying blessed rosaries, scapulars, medals, all legitimate and valuable objects. But when he, gifted with mystical insight, discerned the true state of their souls, he encountered a shocking reality. They were living in mortal sin. The sacramentals they carried had no power whatsoever, because the essential foundation was missing the grace of God dwelling within their souls. He explained this with a powerful analogy. Imagine a soldier wearing the most sophisticated armor in the army, carrying the best weapons, wearing the most resistant shield. But this soldier is sick, feverish, can barely stand. What good is all that equipment if the body wearing it is weakened? Sacramentals are indeed real spiritual weapons. The rosary is powerful. The scapular carries authentic promises from Our Lady, but they only work when the soul using them is in a state of grace. A soul in mortal sin is like that sick soldier. No matter how excellent the armor, it cannot protect a body already compromised by disease. Father Pio witnessed the terrible consequences of this error in his mystical visions. In his visions of purgatory, he saw souls arriving at divine judgment, carrying their rosaries and medals, hoping for protection. Yet divine justice did not recognize those objects, because the souls carrying them had rejected grace through unconfessed mortal sin. The solution that Father Pio prescribed was clear and non-negotiable. First secure the state of grace, then use sacramentals. He insisted that his penitents make a complete general confession before receiving any blessed sacramental. Only after sanctifying grace was restored did sacred objects become true weapons of spiritual protection. Let me share Teresa's story, a teacher from Lisbon who learned this lesson the hard way. Teresa was deeply devoted to the Virgin Mary. She prayed the rosary daily, wore the Carmelite scapula, and kept her home filled with sacred images. Yet she was living in a stable union without the sacrament of matrimony, a situation of objective sin that she constantly rationalized. When she finally made a pilgrimage to Lourdes, something extraordinary occurred during the candlelight procession. She felt an oppressive presence, as though all those prayers and sacramentals she carried had no effect whatsoever. That night, she had a disturbing dream in which she saw her soul before Our Lady. The Virgin gazed at the scapular Teresa wore and said sadly, "This scapular cannot protect you while you reject the grace that my son offers." Teresa woke in tears. She returned home, regularized her marital situation through the church, and made a profound general confession. She later reported that it was as if her sacramentals had awakened to life. The rosary that had been mechanical now brought deep consolation, and the scapular that was merely an object became a source of palpable protection. This brings us to the second critical error that Father Pio identified through his mystical revelations. The second devastating error is neglecting sacramental confession while relying on other means of spiritual purification. This error is more subtle, more dangerous precisely because it appears as piety. Father Pio encountered people who fasted rigorously, performed bodily penances, and prayed for hours each day, yet avoided the confessional. Some felt shame. Others thought their sins too insignificant. Still others simply trusted that their other spiritual practices would compensate for the lack of confession. Yet in the revelations that God granted Father Pio concerning the economy of salvation, an absolute truth emerged. There is no substitute for the sacrament of reconciliation. None. Your voluntary penances can diminish temporal punishment. Your prayers can obtain graces. But only the blood of Christ, applied through sacramental absolution, can cleanse mortal sin from the soul. He witnessed this in terrifying visions, souls arriving at divine judgment, carrying their penances as trophies. I fasted every Friday. I prayed 3 rosaries daily. I slept on hard ground. Yet divine justice responded, "Where is the blood of the Lamb? Where is the sacramental mark of reconciliation?" Too late, these souls realized they had built a tower of pious practices on a cracked foundation. The unconfessed mortal sin remained as a structural fissure that rendered everything else invalid. The solution Father Pio taught was what he called preventive protection confession. He recommended monthly confession, even for those in a state of grace, bi-weekly confession for those facing grave temptations, and weekly confession for those seeking heroic holiness. And here lies the secret that few understand. Frequent confession is not merely about removing sins. It's about strengthening the soul against future attacks. Each sacramental absolution is like a spiritual vaccine. It introduces healing grace that fortifies your weak points before the enemy can exploit them. A priest documented this striking case. Father Michael, a young priest in New York, struggled with obsessive thoughts of doubt against the faith. These were not sins he consented to, but violent temptations that tormented him day and night. He fasted, prayed the breviary faithfully, but the temptations only worsened. Desperate, he traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo to confess with Padre Pio. And Padre Pio told him something that changed everything. "Son, your penances are beautiful, but you are trying to extinguish a fire with a fan. You need the blood of Christ applied directly to the wound. Confess yourself weekly even if you have no mortal sin. The sacramental grace will strengthen your mind against these attacks." Father Michael followed the advice. For 6 months, he confessed every Thursday, and gradually, like a wound that heals under constant treatment, the temptations diminished. They did not disappear completely. This life is a battlefield, but they lost their devastating power. He reported that it was as if each confession built an additional layer of spiritual armor that protected his mind. This brings us to the third and perhaps most dangerous error that Father Pio identified. The third catastrophic error is to misunderstand the transforming nature of the Eucharist. This error broke Father Pio's heart more than any other. During his masses, which lasted for hours because he would enter into ecstasy at the moment of consecration, he saw the transcendental reality of that sacrament. He saw Christ himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity, descending upon the altar. He saw the angels prostrating themselves in adoration. He saw heaven and earth meeting in that moment of infinite mercy. But when he looked at the faithful approaching communion, he saw through his mystical gifts something that devastated him. Souls receiving the body of Christ as if it were merely a pious ritual. There was no preparation. There was no spiritual hunger. There was no awareness that they were about to consume God himself. And what is even more grave, through his revelations about the state of souls, Father Pio understood that many received the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin, not from malice, but from ignorance or negligence. They had not examined their consciences. They had not confessed themselves. And so the sacrament that should have been medicine became spiritual poison. St. Paul warns explicitly, whoever eats and drinks unworthily eats and drinks their own condemnation. Father Pio saw this terrible truth manifesting itself in souls that arrived at divine judgment, carrying not only their sins, but also the additional guilt of Eucharistic sacrileges committed through negligence. The solution that Father Pio prescribed had three essential components. First, rigorous examination of conscience before every communion. He taught his penitents to spend at least 5 minutes before Mass reviewing their actions, thoughts, and omissions since their last confession. Any doubt about mortal sin meant going to the confessional before receiving communion, not after. Second, Eucharistic fasting extended beyond the minimum canonical requirement. Although the Church requires only 1 hour of fasting, Father Pio recommended 3 hours when possible. Not from legalism, but because physical fasting creates spiritual hunger. Your empty stomach becomes a constant reminder. I am preparing myself to receive something extraordinary. Third, profound thanksgiving after communion. Father Pio remained in prayer for at least 30 minutes after receiving communion, often up to an hour. He taught that the first 15 minutes after receiving the Eucharist are the most powerful for obtaining graces. Christ is sacramentally present within you in a unique way. This is the moment to make your most urgent requests, to lay bare your greatest needs, to cry out for divine protection. Let me share the testimony of John, a doctor from Boston who discovered the power of this Eucharistic preparation. John was a practicing Catholic, but he treated Mass as merely a Sunday obligation. He would arrive late, leave early, and receive communion out of habit without real preparation. Until one day, during a complex surgery, he nearly lost a patient due to a lapse in judgment. That scare shook him deeply. He began to question everything, his professional competence, but also his superficial spiritual life. A friend gave him a book about Padre Pio, and John was particularly impacted by the accounts of the saint's Eucharistic reverence. He decided to experiment. For 1 month, he would prepare himself for communion exactly as Padre Pio taught. What happened was nothing less than a complete transformation. John reported that in the 3rd week during the Thanksgiving after communion, he felt for the first time in his life a tangible presence. It was not a mystical vision nor an extraordinary phenomenon. It was a deep inner certainty. Christ is here within me in this moment. And that awareness changed everything. His colleagues noticed the transformation. His wife commented that he seemed more patient, more present. But the most striking was what John described as tangible divine protection in moments of temptation. When an opportunity for professional dishonesty arose, or when anger threatened to overwhelm him in traffic, he felt as though an inner voice were saying, "You carry Christ Eucharistic in your soul. Behave accordingly." These 3 errors, sacraments without grace, neglect of confession, misunderstanding of the Eucharist, form what Father Pio called the Trinity of spiritual vulnerability. And what makes this so dangerous is that these are errors committed by sincere people, by devout Catholics who genuinely desire to serve God. But here is the glorious truth that emerges from Father Pio's revelations. Once you understand these errors, once you implement the solutions he prescribed, your spiritual protection increases exponentially. Sanctifying grace stabilized by regular confession, strengthened by the Eucharist received worthily, armed with sacramentals now effective. This creates what the saints called a state of armed vigilance. You are no longer vulnerable to common spiritual attacks. Your soul develops a robust spiritual immune system against sin. The temptations that once knocked you down now encounter fortified resistance. And when that inevitable moment of divine judgment finally arrives, your soul will not appear trembling and stained, but clothed in the protection that comes from authentic preparation. But understanding the revelation is one thing. Implementing it in a practical, consistent, transformative way, that is something completely different. This is precisely where most people stumble. They hear these truths, feel inspired, but then go back home and the old routine takes control again. The inspiration evaporates. The urgency disappears. Father Pio knew this, and that is why he did not offer merely theoretical knowledge about spiritual protection. He developed, through decades of guiding souls, a specific practical sequence, a spiritual routine that anyone can implement immediately to activate this divine protection in their lives. And that specific ritual sequence, that transformation protocol he taught to his closest spiritual children, is what is missing to complete your understanding of this entire, extraordinary revelation. Here is exactly what Father Pio taught for the protection of the soul, based on that devastating revelation he witnessed. Remember the third insight I shared? That one about preparation being everything. Now you are going to understand why he insisted on it so much. Because what he saw was not merely a warning. It was a manual for spiritual survival. And this manual consists of 5 steps, 5 actions in precise order that transform your soul from vulnerable to protected, from exposed to fortified, from unprepared to ready to face divine judgment. Father Pio did not leave this vague. He did not merely say pray more or be better. No, he gave specific practical instructions tested by himself during decades of spiritual battle. And each step has a reason. Each step is connected to what he saw that terrifying night. So grab pen and paper, because what I am about to share is not theory. It is the exact protocol that saints use to protect their souls. The first step is a properly prepared sacramental confession, and it comes first for a crucial reason directly linked to the vision. Father Pio saw that many souls arrived at judgment still carrying sins that they thought had been forgiven, but they had not been. Do you know why? Because their confession was superficial, rushed, without true repentance. The error to avoid is this: confessing sins with your mouth while your heart still justifies them. Yes, I did that, but that invalidates everything. Father Pio was relentless about this. He said, a confession without true contrition is worse than no confession, because you add sacrilege to your sins. So here is what you are going to do. Before going to the confessional, you're going to spend at least 30 minutes in structured examination of conscience. It is not trying to remember your sins. It is systematically reviewing your life in the light of the 10 Commandments and the 7 deadly sins. Write them down. Be specific. I spoke ill of my neighbor 3 times this week is better than I sometimes speak ill of others. And then, and this is critical, you are going to cultivate what Father Pio called true sorrow. Not remorse at being caught, not fear of hell, but genuine sadness at having offended the God who loves you. Father Pio used to weep during his own confessions, even when his sins were minimal. Why? Because he understood the gravity of each offense against infinite love. A woman named Catherine documented her transformation after applying exactly this. She had confessed monthly for years, but always left feeling nothing, no change, no peace. Until one day, she applied Padre Pio's method: detailed examination, deep contrition, specific confession. She said, for the first time in 10 years, I felt the weight being truly lifted. I felt God touch me, and my life changed that week in ways I can't even explain. The second step is receiving the Eucharist in a state of grace. And here's why this comes immediately after confession. Padre Pio saw the protective power of Holy Communion. He witnessed how souls who received Christ worthily carried a visible spiritual strength, a fortitude that others didn't have. But pay attention, and this is absolutely crucial, you must be in a state of grace. If you have unconfessed mortal sin, receiving the Eucharist doesn't protect you, it condemns you. St. Paul is clear, whoever eats and drinks unworthily, eats and drinks their own condemnation. So the order is this: confession first, Eucharist second, always, no exception. And when you receive, spiritual disposition matters as much as the state of grace. It's not just another Sunday. It's Christ himself entering you, body, blood, soul, and divinity. That's why Padre Pio spent hours in preparation before Mass and hours in thanksgiving afterwards. He said, if people really understood what happens in the Eucharist, they would need soldiers to control the crowds in churches. A Benedictine priest documented the following. For years, he celebrated Mass daily, but mechanically, routine, until he read about Padre Pio's Eucharistic devotion and decided to implement just 15 minutes of preparation before Mass and 15 minutes of gratitude after. In 3 months, he reported, my spiritual life was completely transformed. Temptations that had tormented me for years simply disappeared. I feel there's a fortitude in me that I never had before. That is the protective power of the Eucharist received with proper devotion. The third step is sacramental consecration. Blessed Crucifix, Saint Benedict Medal, holy water. And here's the connection to the divine judgment that Padre Pio saw. These objects aren't magical amulets or superstitious charms, but when blessed by the Church and used with authentic faith, they carry real spiritual protection. Protection against demonic influences, protection against specific temptations, protection at the hour of death. Padre Pio had a blessed crucifix with him his entire life. He used it to bless people, exorcise places, defend himself from documented spiritual attacks. There are records of demons fleeing just from the presence of that crucifix. Why? Because it represented not just Christ, but Christ united with the faith and authority of the Church. So here's what you're going to do. Acquire a crucifix, a Saint Benedict medal, or keep holy water in your home. Take them to a priest for formal blessing, not just a quick sprinkling. Ask for the complete blessing with minor exorcism against evil influences, and then use them. Crucifix above the bedroom door, medal worn daily, holy water upon waking and before sleeping, making the sign of the cross and asking for divine protection. Padre Pio taught that this establishes a spiritual perimeter around your life. A documented example: a family was being tormented by unexplained nighttime disturbances. Objects moving, noises, feeling of oppressive presence. They sought out Padre Pio. He gave them holy water that he himself had blessed and instructed them to sprinkle the entire house while praying the creed. That same night, the disturbances ceased completely and never returned. That is real sacramental protection, not superstition. Authentic spiritual power recognized by the Church for 2,000 years. The fourth step is daily protection prayer. Padre Pio had a specific recommendation that he gave to almost everyone who sought spiritual guidance. The prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel. You know, the one that starts, Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. That one. Why that prayer? Because Saint Michael is the prince of the heavenly armies, the protector against Satan and all evil spirits. And Padre Pio saw in his vision of judgment the role that angels played in the defense or accusation of souls. Your protection routine should include this prayer each morning, establishing spiritual armor for the day. And every night before sleep, when you're most vulnerable to spiritual attacks. Padre Pio also strongly recommended combining this with regular rosary prayer. He said, the rosary is the weapon. The prayer to St. Michael is the shield. And here's something few know. Padre Pio personalized his guidance. For people facing specific temptations, he recommended specific prayers to the patron saints of that battle. Struggling with impurity? Saint Joseph. With anger? Saint Francis. With doubts of faith? Saint Thomas Aquinas. A man named James testified to the following. He struggled with vices for 20 years. Tried everything: therapy, support groups, willpower. Nothing worked for more than a few weeks. Then he visited Padre Pio, who gave him simple advice. Pray to Saint Michael every morning, asking for specific protection against your temptation. Do this with faith for 40 days without fail. James did. On the 40th day, he reported that the power of the vice over him was broken. It didn't vanish completely, but lost its overwhelming power over him. 15 years later, he was still free. That is the power of disciplined and specific protection prayer. And now the fifth and final step, continuous vigilance. Because here is the truth that Father Pio hammered incessantly: spiritual protection is not a one-time event. It's a lifestyle. It's a commitment you maintain month after month, year after year, until death. This means monthly confession at minimum, weekly if possible. Father Pio confessed himself daily. He who had the stigmata of Christ, who performed miracles, who saw angels, he confessed every single day. If he needed to, how much more do we? It means frequent reception of the Eucharist, not just Sunday. Father Pio recommended daily Mass for those who could. If you can't, then at least 2 to 3 times a week. Each communion renews your spiritual fortress. Each Mass pours grace upon your soul. It means daily examination of conscience. Every evening before bed, review: where did I sin today? Where could I have loved more? Where did I fail to be holy? And then contrition, resolution to amend, confidence in mercy. And it means integrating all of this into a sustainable rhythm. Because Father Pio was realistic. He knew that most people couldn't spend 4 hours a day in prayer like he did. So he said, do what you can with faithfulness. 15 minutes done faithfully every day for 10 years is worth more than 5 hours done once and then abandoned. The promise is this: your spiritual protection is assured not by perfection, but by perseverance. Not by never falling, but by always getting back up. Not by being holy immediately, but by choosing holiness daily. A nun named Sister Mary Celeste practiced this exact protocol for 50 years. Monthly confession, daily Eucharist when possible, sacramentals used with faith, morning and evening protection prayers, daily examination of conscience. When she was dying at age 89, those with her reported something extraordinary. Her face was radiant. It literally emanated a soft light. And her last words were, I am not afraid. I am prepared. I spent my life preparing for this moment. She faced judgment without terror. Why? Because she lived exactly what Father Pio taught. And now you have the same protocol, the same instructions that saints followed, the same path that leads from vulnerable soul to protected and prepared soul. What Father Pio saw that night was not merely a terrifying revelation about divine judgment. It was merciful instruction on how to survive it, on how to present yourself before God not in panic and despair, but in humble confidence and well-founded hope. Remember the woman at the beginning? The one Father Pio saw being condemned, the vision that haunted him for days. He didn't share that vision just to frighten. He shared it to save, to awaken sleeping souls, to cry out through the decades, wake up, prepare yourselves. Judgment is real and so is protection. You now know what to do. You have the 5 steps. You understand the order. You have seen testimonies of real transformation. Now it's your choice, your soul, your eternity. So don't wait. Don't say, I'll start next week or when I have more time. Start today. Start tonight. Schedule your confession this week, not next month, this week. Get your crucifix or St. Michael medal tomorrow. Pray the protection prayer before you sleep tonight. Because every day that passes without this protection is a day of unnecessary vulnerability. And you don't know, none of us knows, when you will be called to judgment. Father Pio lived to be 81 years old. He had decades to prepare, but he prepared as if he were to die tomorrow. Every day for 81 years. And when he was finally called on September 23rd, 1968, he was ready, completely ready. Do you want to be ready? Then implement these 5 steps. Not all at once if that's too much, but start today. Tell me in the comments which of these steps resonated most deeply with you. Which one will you implement first? I want to know. I want to follow your journey. I want to celebrate your transformation. And if this video impacted you, if you felt it was made exactly for you at this moment in your life, subscribe to the channel, because there's much more coming. More teachings from Father Pio, more revelations from the saints, more truths that the Church kept for centuries and that need to be shared. But mainly, share this. Share it with someone you love who is unprepared. Because the greatest act of charity you can do for someone is not to give them money or time. It is to help save their eternal soul. This is the path that saints have walked. This is the protocol that works. This is the protection that God offers through His Church. Now it's your turn to walk it. May Father Pio intercede for you. May Saint Michael defend you. May the Virgin Mary protect you. And may you present yourself before God at the moment of your judgment, not in terror, but in peace, prepared, protected, ready for the eternity that Christ won for you. Go now, start now. Your soul depends on it. And I'll see you in the next video, where we'll dive even deeper into the mysteries that Father Pio revealed to the world. Until then, stay in grace, stay protected, stay prepared.